Can God use hardship in your life? I think He can. You know, in the Bible, it often talks about God's people going through times of exile. They were in exile in many places, in Egypt, in Assyria, and in Babylon. Those are hard places where they were taken out of their element and had to endure life in a way that they never thought possible. And that happens to us too. We often suffer hardship. We end up in a place we never thought we'd end up in. And sometimes it makes us feel like we're far from God. But what I want you to see, and I'm going to show you a video clip here, what I want you to see is how God can use that time in your life, that hardship, to do something deep in your heart. So I have a 4-minute video clip here from a message that I gave once. It's based on a book that I wrote. Let's watch and see what God might do in your life through the hardship that you're going through.
See, exile is a prerequisite for greatness. And by greatness, I don't mean fame and fortune. Greatness means becoming a person of blessing. God uses exile to prepare us and expand us into people of blessing. You might say, well, I don't want to be a person of blessing. I just want to be happy. And exile isn't making me happy. Well, guess what? If you want to be with God, His plan is to make you a person of blessing because that's who He is. And He shapes us into His image. That's our calling. But for that to happen, God needs to first deal with our dark side, and that happens in exile. In fact, the word exile in Hebrew has a double meaning. In the book of Ezekiel, God told Ezekiel that He was going to send him and God's people into exile. Listen, Son of man, prepare for yourself baggage for exile and go into exile, Gala. The Hebrew word for go into exile is Gala. So that's one definition of the word. But interestingly, God used the same word in a different way in Ezekiel. God said this, I will tear down the wall you have covered with whitewash and will level it to the ground so that its foundation will be laid bare. Gala. So there's the second definition. The Hebrew word Gala is translated in two different ways. In the first verse, it means exile. In the second verse, it means to be laid bare. It can also mean to expose, uncover, reveal, or be stripped. I think the word Gala came to have two different meanings because when you are in exile, you feel like God is laying you bare. He's exposing you. The pain of exile reveals who you really are. So exile and exposure are one and the same. When you've got the one, it comes with the other. God does in us what He did to that wall. He tears down everything false in us to expose our foundation. Good times expose nothing. Hard times expose the weaknesses in our character. Think back through the various hard seasons that you've walked through in life. What was exposed in you that you didn't know was there? Fear, anger, resentments, insecurities? Yeah, all those things. What about this year with the pandemic? What did you see in yourself that you didn't know existed? Maybe some relational weaknesses, some financial weaknesses. Now, it's important to understand that God doesn't send you into exile to shame you or punish you. He wants to purify you so He can use you to be a blessing to many people, just like Abraham. But in order to do that, God has to bring your impurities to the surface. And to do that, He turns up the heat. So, you have to decide what you want to do when that happens. You see, how you handle your exile and the exposure of your dark side determines if you will become a person of blessing or not. Many people just get mad. That's normal. The problem is they stay mad. They don't want to look at their dark side. They'd rather justify it and point the finger to blame everything and everyone else, even God. Some people go their whole life that way, never becoming a blessing. Instead, they turn bitter and get stuck in exile. They live with a chip on their shoulder, mad at the world. Other people turn to denial to cope with their exile. They choose to ignore what God is trying to show them. And so they numb their losses, meaning they drink a little more, or work more, or cruise the internet more. Or they do more shopping, more sleeping, or get more religious. There are all kinds of ways to distract yourself from what God is trying to tell you. But what I want you to see here is that exile is your opportunity to be transformed, to be changed into a person of blessing like Abraham was. But in order to move on from exile, it requires that you let God do His full work in you. This is when it's so important to be convinced of God's love for you. You need to be convinced that He loves you even in your mess, after you've been laid bare and have all your weaknesses in full sight.
Okay, well, I hope you found that helpful. It was just a brief clip, but I think it gave you some insight into what God might do through a time of hardship. If you'd like to know more about that, the book that I was referring to is called Return from Exile. And Return from Exile looks at a few different things. It looks like what brings us into exile. What are the things that get us into a place of hardship? What can we learn in exile? How might God use that exile to speak to us in a certain way? And then how do we return from exile? So many people have a time of hardship and they never get out of it. It defines their life. So if you're in that place, how do you return from exile? How do you get your life back? And having gotten it back, learned from the hardship that you had. Okay? Please check out the book. Check out my website, readingremy.com. And if you're interested, I also offer some life coaching. I can talk you through some of these things that you might be working on. I'd love to do that. So check it out at readingremy.com.